The world watches Ukraine, now in its fourth year of war since Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. Martial law was declared, granting the military expanded powers and suspending some civilian rights to ensure national security. One major consequence: national elections have been postponed, as Ukraine's constitution prohibits voting during martial law. The government argues that free and fair elections are impossible under constant attack, with millions displaced and parts of the country under occupation. Parliamentary and presidential elections scheduled for 2023 and 2024 did not occur, sparking international debate. Critics question Ukraine's democratic commitments, while supporters recognize the extraordinary challenges of holding a vote during war. The threat of missile strikes makes gathering at polling stations dangerous, and millions of refugees and internally displaced people cannot easily participate. Large swaths of territory remain under Russian control, making voting logistically impossible in those areas. The government faces a difficult balance, defending the nation while upholding democratic principles under global scrutiny. As the war continues, concerns grow about the long-term health of Ukraine's democracy. International partners largely support the postponement, but some voices express unease about the delay. The situation forces Ukraine to weigh immediate survival against its democratic ideals. The world is watching to see how Ukraine navigates this unprecedented test. The debate intensified on December 9, 2025, when Donald Trump publicly demanded Ukraine hold elections immediately. In a Politico interview, Trump accused President Zelenskyy of using the war to avoid facing voters, questioning Ukraine's democratic status. "They talk about a democracy, but it gets to a point where it's not a democracy anymore," Trump said, challenging Ukraine's image as a defender of democratic values. His remarks risk undermining international support for Ukraine, as democracy is central to its appeal for Western aid. Trump also criticized Zelenskyy personally, claiming he ignored a U.S. plan to end the war and implying a lack of leadership. He argued that Russia holds the upper hand due to its size and pointed to lost Ukrainian territory as evidence of failure. These comments followed stalled U.S.-Ukrainian negotiations, adding to diplomatic tensions. Trump's message: Ukraine is failing both militarily and democratically. This rhetoric puts new pressure on Kyiv, fueling critics who question the legitimacy of Ukraine's government. The timing of Trump's statements, amid ongoing conflict and international negotiations, amplifies their impact. For Ukraine, such criticism from a major U.S. figure complicates its efforts to maintain global support. The debate over elections is now a flashpoint in the broader struggle for Ukraine's future. The world is left to consider: can democracy survive under siege? President Zelenskyy responded to Trump's criticism during a visit to Italy, stating, "I am always ready for elections." He emphasized that elections are only possible if security conditions are met, turning the challenge back to Ukraine's Western partners. Zelenskyy called for more advanced air defense systems and international support to ensure safe, fair voting. His message: if the West wants elections, it must help create the conditions for them. The practical obstacles are immense. Millions displaced, soldiers on the front lines, and refugees abroad all need to be included. Zelenskyy's stance reframes the debate. Democracy in Ukraine depends on international assistance as much as on internal will. He highlights that holding elections during war is not just a political decision, but a logistical and security challenge. The call for help is both a plea for understanding and a demand for concrete support. For Ukraine, democracy and defense are inseparable. Zelenskyy's response underscores that the debate over elections is also a debate over the level of Western commitment. The world must decide if it will invest in both Ukraine's security and its democracy. The future of Ukrainian elections now hinges on international action. The European Union quickly responded to the controversy, reaffirming its support for President Zelenskyy as Ukraine's legitimate, democratically elected leader. EU spokesperson Anita Hipper stated that elections should only be held when conditions allow, aligning with Ukraine's position. The EU recognizes the exceptional circumstances of war and supports Ukraine's decision to postpone elections for safety and fairness. This backing provides crucial diplomatic cover, countering narratives that question Ukraine's democratic legitimacy. As a bloc of democracies, the EU's endorsement carries significant weight internationally. The EU's message, a rushed, unsafe election, would harm democracy more than a justified delay. Ukraine's sovereignty means it must determine the right time for elections. The The EU's support allows Ukraine to focus on defense, knowing its democratic partners understand the stakes. This solidarity helps stabilize Ukraine's international standing amid military and political pressures. The EU's stance is one of pragmatic solidarity, prioritizing safety and legitimacy over rigid adherence to electoral timelines. The message to critics: Ukraine's democracy is alive, but must be protected, not endangered, by premature elections. The EU's position strengthens Ukraine's hand as it navigates war and political uncertainty. Some argue that holding elections during war is essential for democratic accountability. They believe leaders must renew their mandate, even in crisis, to avoid setting a precedent for unchecked power. Wartime elections would symbolize Ukraine's resilience and commitment to democracy, sending a powerful message to Russia and the world. Successfully conducting a vote could boost morale and reassure international partners of Ukraine's democratic vitality. Critics, including Trump, suggest the government may be using war to cling to power. An election could dispel such doubts. A new mandate for Zelenskyy or gains for the opposition would reinforce Ukraine's democratic credentials. The political landscape has shifted since 2019, with new leaders and priorities emerging. An election would allow the system to reflect these changes and give voice to diverse perspectives on the war and the country's future. Proponents argue that a national conversation through elections is healthy and necessary for post-war planning. They see voting as a way to strengthen legitimacy at home and abroad. For these advocates, democracy must not be suspended, even under fire. The debate is about more than timing. It's about the soul of Ukrainian democracy. Others warn that wartime elections would be reckless and dangerous. The primary concern is safety. Russian attacks make polling stations potential targets, risking civilian lives. Millions of refugees and internally displaced people cannot participate, and those in occupied territories would be disenfranchised. Soldiers on the front lines would struggle to vote, undermining the legitimacy of any result. Organizing a fair, inclusive election is logistically impossible under current conditions. Wartime campaigns could also fracture national unity, distracting leaders from defense and creating divisions Russia could exploit. Political rivalries should be set aside until the existential threat is over. Many believe postponement is the only responsible choice to protect both lives and democracy. An election now could deepen instability and weaken Ukraine's position. The risks of voting under fire outweigh the symbolic value of holding an election. For many, survival and unity must come first. The logistics of a wartime election are daunting. Creating an accurate voter register is nearly impossible with millions displaced and regions inaccessible. Without a reliable list, the risk of fraud and mismanagement is high. Funding is another major obstacle. Ukraine's resources are focused on defense, not elections. International partners would need to provide billions in support to make a vote feasible. Voting for refugees and soldiers would require unprecedented coordination and security, including protection from cyber attacks. Martial law restricts freedoms essential for a fair campaign, like free press and public gatherings. Opposition candidates would struggle to compete on equal footing with the incumbent government. The result could be an election that is neither free nor fair, undermining its legitimacy. These hurdles make a credible wartime vote nearly impossible. The challenges are not just political, they are practical and profound. The debate over Ukrainian elections has major international implications. Western support for Ukraine is tied to its image as a democracy resisting authoritarianism. Delaying elections risks fueling doubts and weakening global backing. Politicians and advocacy groups in the West push for elections as a symbol of resilience, complicating Ukraine's position. Ukrainian leaders must constantly reassure allies that postponement is temporary and democracy remains the goal. International perceptions can influence future aid, making this debate a critical part of Ukraine's war strategy. Zelenskyy's approach: invite partners to help solve the security and logistical challenges, sharing responsibility for Ukraine's democracy. The message: if the world demands elections, it must help make them possible. Managing global expectations is as vital as military operations. The fate of Ukraine's democracy is now a shared international concern. Ukraine stands at a crossroads, torn between the need for unity and the call to uphold democratic principles. One path prioritizes survival and postpones elections until sovereignty is secured, supported by the government and European allies. The other urges a vote as an act of defiance and accountability, championed by critics and some democracy advocates. The decision will shape Ukraine's future and set a precedent for democracies under threat. A rushed, unsafe election could damage legitimacy and deepen divisions. Delaying too long risks accusations of authoritarianism and erodes trust at home and abroad. The dilemma: how to defend the nation while preserving the values it fights for. The world watches, knowing Ukraine's choice will echo far beyond its borders. The debate is not just about timing, but about the very nature of Ukrainian democracy. The outcome will define Ukraine for generations. The stakes could not be higher.